Bulgaria is heading for its 8th parliamentary election in just 4 years after mass protests forced the resignation of yet another prime minister. Now, the president has stepped down, paving the way for him to run in a new snap election. So, what does this all mean for Bulgaria's political future? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, Bulgaria has seen thousands of demonstrators on the streets of Sofia for weeks protesting against endemic corruption, the 2026 budget and the state of social care. The Prime Minister resigned in December and now, in a dramatic twist, President Rumen Radev has stood down. Amid speculation, he will launch a new political party to run for office himself.
Night after night, amid freezing temperatures late last year, tens of thousands of protesters gathered on the streets of Sofia and other major cities in Bulgaria. Raising their torches as a beacon of hope, they chanted for a future of togetherness. Named the Gen Z protest due to the large number of university students, they eventually led to the collapse of Bulgaria's centre-right coalition government. Last week, they were out again, this time demanding machine voting be used for the upcoming elections. And then, the shock resignation of the country's president.
The battle for the future of our homeland lies ahead, and I believe we will face it together with all of you, the worthy, the inspired, and the unyielding. We are ready, we can, and we will succeed.
Radev is now set to form his own parliamentary party to run for Prime Minister. Bulgaria's politics has been on shaky ground for years. 2020 saw the start of the nationwide anti-corruption protests, which continue today.
Any party that operates in a mafia-like way must leave and never return.
Bulgaria is ranked among the EU's most corrupt members. The country's recent turmoil coincides with an historic shift, the euro replacing the Bulgarian leu, a move many rallied against due to fears of price hikes amid a cost of living crisis. Even with the increasing discontent, voter turnout for this year's snap elections is expected to be low, as Bulgarians vote in their 8th election since 2021. Will this one finally give them the political stability they so desperately want?
Well, let's bring in our guests on this one. Joining us from the Bulgarian capital, Sofia, we have Vessela Tcherneva. She is Deputy Director at the European Council on Foreign Relations and a former foreign policy advisor to the former Bulgarian Prime Minister, Kirill Petkov. Also in Sofia, we have Martin Vladimirov. He is Director of the Geoeconomics programme that's at the Centre for the Study of Democracy. And in Glasgow, in Scotland, we have Clare Nuttall. Clare is News Editor at IntelliNews. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. Vessela, we'll come to you first. These protests, just give us your impression of how damaging they have been. How much instability have they created?
Oh, it's actually quite interesting that you put the question this way. We tend to see the protest exactly the other way. We actually thought that, and when I say we, I mean most of the kind of pro-European voices and thinkers here in Sofia, that protests were actually very constructive because they appeared at the moment when the stagnation in the country looked actually quite as a dead end, politically, but also economically. And frankly, this was also a moment when a lot of young people found their voice in political sense. They went out on the street. We saw first-time voters coming in very, very big numbers. And actually, I would say that stability has not been such a great thing for the country, in the sense that you may have heard or not the term stabilocracy, which is known from various regions in our part of Europe. And in that sense, bringing more life into the political debate has been very welcome.
Well, let's get Martin in on this. Martin, do you agree that these protests were a sign of young people engaging in democracy, or do you think this was done to hamstring successive governments?
Well, I agree with Vessela that these protests were unprecedented, with the amount of young people, Gen Zers, joining the rallies, but they were much more widespread than it has been reported. You had people from all kind of social stratum and age groups that have participated. So I think there is a general social backlash against the current political elite. So there has been demand for change. There has been a demand to dismantle some of the established or perceived state capture networks that have dominated the political and economic life of the country. But I don't think these protests have coalesced under one, concrete idea forward. So they were more of a sign of frustration rather than a clear signal for where things people want to see going.
Thanks, Martin. Claire, to you, the upshot is Bulgaria is now looking at an 8th election in 4 years. I mean, by anyone's standards, this is political chaos, isn't it?
Yes, I agree. Obviously, there's been repeated elections, and each one of them has produced a extremely fragmented parliament, and that's meant that there's been short-lived coalition governments that have been unstable. There's been caretaker governments, and there doesn't, at this moment, seem to be any obvious way out. I mean, it's possible that the president who recently resigned will run for office. There's certainly speculation about that, and perhaps will become a unifying figure. But the problem is that each of these elections has failed to solve the problem.
Thank you. Back to you, Vessela. You know, all the protests, what do you think the key issues driving people onto the streets were?
May I just comment on this issue of too many elections in too short of a time?
Of course, yeah.
Because I think this is a key characteristics when we talk about Bulgarian political process. I mean, we have seen this precedent of Italy in the past as well, having very short-lived governments, and yet, its economy hasn't been harmed by that. I think, in a way, this is also a conclusion in Bulgaria, that you have this government really changing in the last 4 years. But in a way, the course of the country hasn't changed. But as Martin said, and I think this is the key, this movement, the protest, the frustration is against this oligarchic style of governance, the state capture, which long term is going also to impede the economy. And so, while in immediate terms this has not caused an economic crisis, long term it makes the country grow slower, become more and more kind of dependent on one person or very few persons' political interests.
Thank you. Martin, talk to me about corruption, because a lot of young Bulgarians seem to have a real issue with allegations of corruption at the highest level in Bulgaria, that politicians are all in it for themselves, and that this is the one thing holding Bulgaria back.
Well, I'll give you some numbers. Our Center for the Study of Democracy has been monitoring corruption pressure for the last 3 decades. And we estimate that roughly a quarter of all bureaucratic transactions, meaning when people have to interact with government institutions, are corrupt, meaning that institutions or officials are requesting a bribe to conduct business. And so there has been a widespread dissatisfaction with anti-corruption policy in Bulgaria. And we have established in our assessments that this petty corruption, however, is not what frustrates people most. They're kind of used to that. They perceive it as business as usual. What frustrates them is this state capture, where, again, we assessed among all EU 27 members, Bulgaria is among the top 5 most captured states. And people see lack of any real competition and discriminatory practices on all business and institutional levels that undermine the ability of businesses, private businesses, or certain individuals to climb the social ladder or the economic ladder. And this hurts business, as Vessela mentioned. Our economic growth has been robust. I mean, let's not exaggerate. We have had a 3% GDP growth for the past 5 years, and we are growing more than most EU members. But our potential for growth is much higher. So we have lagged behind countries like Poland, like Slovenia, like Czechia, and this prevents Bulgaria to kind of integrate more closely with Western European living standards and also business supply chain. So state capture is behind this kind of dissatisfaction with Bulgaria's growth trajectory and economic development. And I think that's the main driving force behind the protests. This is the elite that went out on the street, in a way. The elite that feels that they can be at a much better place than they are. The large proportion, the large kind of majority of the population, I think, is generally satisfied with what's going on. I mean, living standards are increasing fast, wages are growing, but they see that there is a ceiling, there is this invisible ceiling that they cannot overcome.
Claire, to you, Bulgaria has huge potential as a country for investment. It strikes me that the one thing that will put off foreign investors pumping cash into Bulgaria is instability, the kind of chaos they see in the politics, people on the streets protesting, all these foreign investors who would be looking to find partners in Europe to work with and trade with and invest in. If they see all of this in Bulgaria, this is going to kind of make them think elsewhere, isn't it?
Well, I would say it's not only that. I mean, for a start, I actually agree with the other panelists that it's fairly clear that the protesters are anti-corruption protesters to a large extent. And I mean, that seems to me like a sign of a positive sign that so many Bulgarians are ready to go out on the streets and fight for a better country. I wasn't personally at the protests in Bulgaria, but I saw the similar protests in Romania about 10 years ago. And that was really people who wanted a normal European country and a better future. But to go back to investment, I think the main problem is less that the protests have created an image of instability than the fact that we haven't had a government in Bulgaria that's been in power for more than, say, a few months or a year or two at most, that's been able to have a long-term program to develop the country, to sort of adopt long-term investment plans, to do things like structural reforms. And that's resulted in things like Bulgaria lagging on the absorption of EU funds. I do believe that the instability generally is obviously not sending out a positive image to investors, and it is preventing Bulgaria from achieving its potential. I think it's hard to tell exactly how much is down to the instability within the country, because obviously for investors far away, you also think of the geopolitical situation. I mean, people tell me that Bulgaria is kind of in the general Ukraine area, which to people who don't know the region well is seen as a risk factor. There's also been generally the trend towards deglobalization, the chaos caused by the Trump tariffs last year. So I think there's a lot of factors, not all of them specific to Bulgaria.
Thank you. Vessela, to you, just talk to me about your impression of why the president stood down this week, Rumen Radev. There are reports that he's going to run in the next election and try to get back into power that way. How did Bulgarians feel seeing that news conference?
It was not a complete surprise, let's put it this way. President Radev has been hinting at this for a while. He has had very outspoken political positions on issues which are not necessarily in the realm of the president. And so I guess people are expecting or were expecting him to run. The question was whether he would do it now or whether he would wait until the end of his mandate and only then enter the kind of party politics. There will be some people who will probably feel betrayed by the fact that he did not finish his mandate. He has exactly one more year to go. He would have had if he hadn't resigned. But I think for the majority of people who sympathize with him, this is probably a change of the political landscape in Bulgaria, which is a welcome one for them. I guess the big question is where this new political party of Radev is going to really position itself, both on this issue of anti-corruption and the needed structural reforms, but also in terms of Bulgaria's positioning within the EU. Because in the past, Radev has been very critical of some EU positions, critical of the Union itself, especially on foreign policy. And I think this is really the field to watch, because for the majority of Bulgarians, the EU is kind of their part of their identification, and the majority supports Bulgaria's EU membership. So how Radev is going to play this part is going to be important.
Thank you. Martin, just on the ex-president Radev, just give us a flavor of what he's about, because he is pro-Russia, isn't he? What kind of party do you think he will launch into Bulgarian politics?
Well, CSD did a joint investigation with the Wall Street Journal back in 2017, and we discovered how the then Russian security services handed over a specific playbook to the Bulgarian Socialist Party that elected Mr. Radev to the presidency, a playbook on how to elect a pro-Russian leader. And I think the Russians did a very good job. So since his very first day, he has been, I would say, not openly pro-Russian, but has communicated or kind of amplified many of the Russian disinformation narratives, especially around Ukraine, around this idea of a peace initiative, which means basically Ukraine giving up on the front lines and accepting some kind of a negotiated peace or imposed peace. And in the re-election bid in 2021, he actually declared on stage during one of the debates before the elections that Crimea is Russian. So this is roughly speaking a turning point in terms of his position, which after the Russian invasion of Ukraine became even more and more kind of pro-Russian, or I would say anti-strong involvement of the EU and NATO in the Ukrainian conflict. And this has turned around the public opinion in Bulgaria. I mean, if after the Russian invasion we saw a major reduction of the support for Russia, I mean, Bulgaria is generally a pro-Russian country in terms of its public opinion, but we saw that decline precipitously in March, April 2022. And then Radev, it feels like single-handedly dragged this public opinion back to around 40-50% support generally for Russia. It's of course it's nuanced, but President Radev has played a very good role and very productive role for the Kremlin in Bulgaria. And from that point of view, his positioning as a major political force in the next election might kind of shift the overall geopolitical orientation of the country. He has already signaled a policy stance that is closely aligned with those of Prime Minister Orban in Hungary or Prime Minister Fico in Slovakia. So we'll see what happens, as Trump says, but we definitely see him emerging as probably one of the most powerful political forces in the country. And so all of the other parties will have to align themselves somehow to this new situation if they want to survive also in terms of entering parliament. Some parties are not going to be able to enter and pass the threshold. So it will be a very different race this time around.
Claire, to you, I think a lot of people in Brussels and beyond will be following this very closely, having just heard what we now know about the ex-president Radev. I mean, when you look at the European Union, they have question marks against the leaders of Hungary, Slovakia, now Czechia, and Bulgaria could very soon be even more Russian-leaning.
Yes, I agree. Obviously, I would defer to the Bulgaria-based panelists on exactly where he stands. But I mean, obviously, we've been following this, and he certainly does have a more pro-Russian stance than some of the other leading Bulgarian politicians, and on issues such as the war in Ukraine. There's already a kind of pro-Russia or Russia-leaning bloc in Central Europe. I mean, with Viktor Orban in Hungary, obviously, and the leaders of Slovakia, and now probably Czechia is going that way after the election last year. So it does seem likely that there would be a similar situation with Bulgaria. Obviously, there's elections coming up in other European countries, and it may not be only Central Europe, but there certainly is that kind of a grouping. And on the issue of Ukraine, I think that's fairly likely that Radev would align with those figures.
Thank you. Vessela, while we have you, can I ask about how the euro currency is going? So Bulgaria, you've been in the euro now just over 3 weeks. How's it going? Are you seeing inflation? What are people saying?
I think the initial panic, or let's say attempts to fuel panic, have subsided. People are more and more used to the coins, to the banknotes, and one has to say that this act of joining the eurozone is indeed the last step in this formal integration of Bulgaria into the EU after having entered Schengen last year. I think in terms of anchoring, especially in these very, very turbulent times, this is an important factor for stability if we're serious about stability. And I am not quite sure that any of the Bulgarian politicians would dare moving radically towards Orban or Fico, simply because Bulgaria's economy is not only very dependent on the EU and on other European economies, but also because I think the feeling of vulnerability here is high. We have had economic crisis, hyperinflation in the 90s. It would be very difficult for any politician, even for Mr. Radev, to break this consensus that we need stable pegs like the euro.
Martin, just looking ahead to the election then in 2026, what do you think needs to change in Bulgaria for people to have confidence in a government that will last?
They want to see democratic institutions becoming less politicized, and to see whether these are truly independent. So there has been a kind of a widespread belief that none of the regulators, central bank, judicial system institutions like the Supreme Judicial Council, that they are independent bodies, that they actually take decisions based on the public good. They are seen as just instruments of special interests, of private interests dominating decision making. And so there is a huge mistrust in how the democracy in Bulgaria works. And there is a belief that we are living in a facade democracy where actually decisions are called by a couple of very influential people. And President Radev is not going to change this mentality. So I don't see, for example, voter turnout increasing significantly in the upcoming elections.
Thank you, Martin, Vessela in Sofia as well, and Claire in Glasgow. Thank you all. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. For now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye, and thank you for watching.